This is Capturing Light, episode number 148 with Laura Hudock.
Welcome to Capturing Light, a director of photographers podcast, spotlighting cinematography tips, tools, and techniques, inspiring and educating filmmakers like you so you can illuminate your vision. And now, your host, Les Gaddis.
Welcome to the Capturing Light podcast. I'm your host, Les Gaddis, and today we are talking with Laura Hudock. She's an amazing cinematographer that we talked a little bit about Girl State, a documentary that premiered at Sundance this year, 2024. But I really enjoyed the conversation about the documentary versus narrative space, and it was really, really insightful, and I really enjoyed the conversation, and I think you will too. So here is that interview with Laura Hudock.
I want to thank Laura Hudock for coming on the Caption Light podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good. Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about all the exciting stuff that you have going on, going to like world-renowned film festivals and having your work like admired by the masses. But before we get into that, let's talk about like how did you get started, I guess, with cinematography and in the film industry?
Gosh, well, it's been kind of a long and epic journey, but I'll try and sum it up. I guess I started with still photography when I was in high school, when I was like 16. I luckily had my photography teacher kind of pulled me aside and was like, you have an eye, you have to do this. And I was like, oh, okay, let me think about it. But I was always sort of like this quiet observer of the world. So, and also sort of like, I guess a soul of an artist in some way. So that made sense. And then I went to Sarah Lawrence College, where my first year studies was film theory and criticism. So I studied film history and theory for a year, and before even making a movie. And that's when I really fell in love with cinema. I had an incredible professor there. And then also took courses through Tisch NYU Film School, started making films at Sarah Lawrence, went to the BBC Directors Training Program in London, and then also did like an intensive cinematography course at the film school in Prague, FAMU. So that was sort of my start. And then after getting out of college, I was like, how do I work? Well, I PA'd in a couple things while I was in college. And then after I got out of college, I worked at CSC Camera Rental House, which was in New York, for like a year. At the time, there was like two rental houses that were like the main rental houses, Aerie, CSC, and Panavision. And then there I like learned all the cameras, met all the ACs in New York, and then started ACing on like, joined the union, started ACing on like commercials and feature films and eventually television, and tried to like work my way up as an AC. This was like the early 2000s. So it was a challenging moment to be in the industry as a woman. There weren't a ton of female ACs, so I was already dealing with some stuff with that. But then the pathway that you normally move up in a camera department of a loader, second, first operator, DP, really wasn't really there for women at the time. There were basically no female camera operators in New York. There was a few DPs like Alan Curris and Nancy Shriver, but not a lot. And there was just this, and I think it's important it's to talk about this like moment in history, because it is part of our history. That there was this moment in time where there was a collective unconscious bias against women DPs. There was just of like not really thinking that this was something that women could do. It's kind of like a bizarre mindset that needed to shift and is shifting now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so basically, I felt like I didn't want to be an AC for the rest of my life. So, and I wasn't. It was seemed clear that I wasn't really going to quickly move up the ladder at that time. So the only place I could see myself sort of getting opportunity was in documentary and reality. I produced and shot a feature documentary on my own dime with a friend from college. Um, Also had like a still photography portfolio, and then that was documentary travel photography. And those things helped me start to get my first documentary and reality stuff. I'm not a fan of reality, but I needed to build those credits at the time.
Right.
And you know, I sort of did some really challenging stuff. Like one of my first things was like First 48, where I'm following homicide detectives in New Orleans on call for murders. That sort of led to, and a few other shows, and then that led to me getting um, Vice on HBO.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was, I think it was the first female, yeah, I was the first female DP they hired on that show. Um, and then also Woman with Gloria Steinem, about women's rights issues around the world, which then led to like The Circus, and then the feature documentaries. I did a feature doc on the called Invisible Nation, following the president of Taiwan, um, and then once I built, and I did a feature doc following the first women's mountain climbing team in Afghanistan and surrounding conducts of women's rights. So doing all these sort of things and building my name in the doc world helped me to then reach back to my contacts in the narrative world. DPs that I used to AC for that were operators, and be like, hey, let me operate, um, and things were starting to shift a little bit more in the industry. And so I started day playing as an operator
Mm-hmm.
on television mostly. Um, and then the day playing led to full-time operating. Did shows like Westworld, City on a Hill. Um, and then finally got an opportunity to DP an episode of American Rust um, on Showtime. And then now I'm basically have a career where I bounce between doc and narrative, even though it's been a long sort of path, and it's kind of like I feel like they're two different worlds, and I've been learning two different languages. It's like, it takes longer to learn two languages, but then you have two languages. So
Right.
I'm grateful I have a career I can bounce between both the doc and the narrative world. And um, here I am, and I'm really trying to make more of a name for myself in the narrative world at this point in time, because I feel a little more established in the doc space.
Right. And so, I mean, basically, you've had to step away from AC, and then, just kind of make this jump,
Yeah.
um, because, like it is challenging to, go from AC in a market where people only may call you for AC work,
Mhm.
to getting a shot, to operate, to DP. So it's cool to see, and that's one of the questions I was going to ask, and you've already answered it, like that transition. Some people ask, okay, well, how can I make the jump from AC to cam op
Save
to
money because you won't work.
right? Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those
like
things that, yeah,
it's
you
like a
have to.
year of
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my God. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, making that jump from AC to operator, or in my case, I kind of did the DP and doc and then operator. And then he also from operator to DP
Right.
um, is like there's a real sort of slowdown in your career when you're trying to make that transition and be seen as something else. So
Right.
you have to be prepared for a slowdown.
Yeah, for sure. And then also too, just the understanding that people um sometimes don't realize that the lower that you are, quote unquote, on the totem pole, is like the more that you work. So if you're AC, you're going to get calls from cam ops and DPs and everything else because there's more work for ACs than there might be for a singular or multi DP show. Where so it's just that weird kind of thing where you're like, I'm working less, but I'm making more. Once you get to a certain, it's so
True. Yeah.
that's interesting. Um, so from your I guess narrative doc work, or your doc work to the narrative kind
Mm.
of cam mopping and DPing, um, do you feel like the transition you talk about speaking two languages,
Mhm.
it like what works in the doc world that I guess translates over to narrative? Because I can see there's definitely differences, but there's some similarities, and I really believe that doc work
Oh,
could
for
really
sure.
help.
I'm 100% a better narrative DP because of my doc experience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one is just my ability to really take in natural light and like know how to work with what I have.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and it's so like these scenes are so embedded in my mind, light from different locations around the world or different scenes or moments, that like when I go to recreate it um, with artificial light, I really feel like I'm tapped into the feeling that it might be in the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like there's like this truth meter almost in terms of, and it's like, oh, this doesn't feel truthful to me. I mean, part of it's emotional, but and part of it, you might be amplifying or exaggerating, but I don't know. I feel like it's really helped me hone into the way I see,
Mm-hmm.
um, and the way I see light, especially natural light. And then the other is I feel like my handheld skills in the narrative world
Right.
are so much more honed in and instinctual. I mean, I've even had, as an operator, both directors and DPs like come up to me and their direction was, Laura, do your doc thing.
Right.
I'm like, all right, which is just being like present in the moment and using my instincts.
Right.
Because you just after it's like what's the mastery thing? You do so many hours of something, you kind of master it. And if it's I've had hours and hours and hours of handheld work with a camera on my shoulder, having to be present in the moment and figure it out as I go and edit in my head and um follow in the story. It all carries over. I mean, also out the editing in your head that you have to do as a DP.
Right.
I mean, it's not the same. You don't have a director um as strong of a presence in the doc world as you do in the narrative world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you have to hone these skills of like in the moment, sort of how am I going to piece this scene together, and what are the shots that I'm using to build to this scene or this moment.
Right.
Um, um, so gosh, so many things
Yeah,
have
because I
made
mean,
me.
you're actually, you're like you talk about the editing and shooting for the edit, but I mean, you're building a narrative. Truly,
Mhm.
you're telling a story.
Yep.
So it's just, I like the fact that you said you're just present and you're in the moment because that's, I mean, the
I
strongest
mean,
docu
yeah.
shooters, are really masterful at that.
Yeah, it's 100%. Like I mean, I feel like I mean, I have practices in my life that sort of help me hone those skills. I meditate, um, practice yoga, mindfulness, these sort of things,
Mm-hmm.
um, also affect your work. Um, it's so important to be able to also be aware of your own energy, the
Right.
energy that you are giving off, the energy that you are receiving. Um, because I mean, so much of it is just like you can be with someone in like the most vulnerable emotional place, and you need to sort of be a presence that's like there, non-judgmental, receptive, and you can feel that, you
Right.
know, and also read them, like how close can I get? Really read the room, like be present to like their emotional state, like how
Mm-hmm.
far can I go? How close can I get? Is this what is, because you want to capture it and you want to go deep, but you also need to sort of feel out the boundaries that are energetically being placed or
Right.
not placed. Or sometimes you get free range and it's like, yes. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
but that's also usually happens over time. It's a matter of like gaining trust of your subject to let you into the world and have them trust that you have their best interest to tell their story,
Right.
really.
For sure. Awesome. So let's jump into Girl State.
Hmm.
Um, so let's start with like how did that project get introduced to you? How did you get brought into the project? Like what was that story?
Okay. Well, first I want to say Girl State was a team effort. There were 7 DPs on the film. So, and we each followed a main character. So it's not, I just want to make it clear that there was a team of talented DPs that put this together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but basically, I think Jesse and Amanda were looking to add some DPs to the team. A couple of the DPs that were on Boy State came back to it. And then I guess Matthew Heineman, who I've worked with on a couple projects, recommended me to Jesse. And so I, chatted with Jesse over the phone um, and I was like, yeah, this sounds great, and I love, supporting films and projects that support especially women's empowerment, and this seemed like that, and it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I was, yeah, totally game.
Right. So like what was the prep like? And can you speak a little bit about the collaboration between DPs? Like as far as, getting um, a specific visual language and like just the collaboration aspect of working with other cinematographers.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, well, the first was the discussion of like what camera and lenses are we going to use. We decided with the Canon C500 Mark II. We were trying to find like some prime lenses that would be quality, but full frame and relatively smaller and lightweight compared
Mm-hmm.
to primes. So we went with the Canon Cine primes. Um, there were also a couple DPs that used the C70 on a gimbal. I
Okay.
didn't utilize that tool. I'm more of a handheld. I have my own thoughts about gimbal use, but it wasn't for me on this project. So I did all handheld. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it came down to picking camera lenses, and then for consistency, we wanted to basically all pick the same focal length,
Okay.
so that there was this, similarity in we're not all doing a close-up on a 27 where it's distorted. I mean, maybe that's a look, or
Right.
maybe we all are or not. And we had like a Zoom meeting, which is a collective discussion, and some emails back and forth, sort of um, debating what the lens should be. I felt, Boy State was such a well done doc, but for me, the lens was a little too wide for what
Mm-hmm.
I thought Girl State should be, and in that, like when you're, someone's across the room, you may not quite reach it, or when you do a close up, it's a little distorted, or you can only get so close. So we collectively decided to go with a 50 mil
Mm-hmm.
prime as the main lens. I also did a few shots with the 35, so we had both, but the majority of the film across cameras was shot with a 50 mil prime. which basically made it so we could be really much closer to the subject,
Mm-hmm.
so that we could have more intimate close-ups. And the only challenging thing with that is like pulling focus on 50 mil all day long, full frame,
Right.
mostly wide open, is super challenging.
Right.
And we had like, it was a marathon sort of shoot of like, I mean, it was the majority of it was a week, but it was really over, 10 days of like 14-hour days, nonstop verite.
Mm-hmm.
This is exhausting. That's the only thing is we wanted to build a package that was small footprint, lightweight enough to deal with a 14-hour day,
Right.
in stop verite. That's really the main priority.
Right.
And then each of us was paired with a subject, and we had like this big team meeting room where we could all come and have our plan and or discuss what happened. I usually give the lowdown to Jesse and Amanda. I filmed this or filmed that. But then the actual filming of it was very small and intimate. It was just me and sound and my subject.
Right.
So just running around all day. So there you're also, and luckily, and the subject that I followed was Emily Worthmore, if
Mm-hmm.
you in the film. And it was, I think, also part of like making a great documentary is not only great casting of your subjects, but great casting of like your DP and your DP with the subject. Because I feel like they did a great job pairing me and Emily together. I feel like we connected. I was able to gain her trust relatively quickly, and she
Mm-hmm.
let me into her world very graciously. Um, and because she gave me that access into her space, I feel like it made her story more dynamic. And yeah, that's everything. Access is everything. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, um, being that it's usually just in these type of situations where it's so intimate, you and sound, and you're pulling your own focus,
Mhm.
and things like that, which I'm sure your background in AC work and just extensive doc work really helped. Could you give the audience any type of tips on how to maybe establish like a I mean, it sounds really surface level, but just establish trust with the subject and being able to gain access. And I know it depends on
Right.
the interview and people, but you've done really well with being able to like gain access and tell an authentic story. And is there something that you do with the talent?
Yeah, I mean, I think first, have some FaceTime with them without the camera,
Mm-hmm.
connect with them as a human being. Like I'm not just a robot here doing a job. I'm a human, interested in your story. Sometimes I share things about myself so they feel that they can share things with me. So it's
Right.
like it's more of a reciprocal sort of energy.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I think that's very important too.
yeah.
The reciprocal energy. I hear
Yeah.
that all the time. And if you become part of their story and you're not just taking their story and
Mm.
you're exchanging stories, I mean that's really good advice for sure.
Yeah. And so yeah, so they don't feel like they're just like being examined and it becomes,
Right.
I mean, it's not always that case. I mean, sometimes you have some challenging subjects, but in this particular case, I feel like Emily and I actually became like almost like friends, and we still stay in touch.
Mm-hmm.
And and um even though we have very different political beliefs and actually a lot of them are polar opposite, I still found a way to see her as a human, see her wonderful heart, to connect with her,
Mm-hmm.
and still and respect her perspective and story. I think part of it is, yeah, and the other thing, so time ahead of time for sure, reciprocal energy, and then the other is also just sort of being aware of your own energy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's funny. I don't know how the sound may sound kind of funny, but like you walk in a room and a dog will sniff you and be like, "Oh, I like you," or "I don't like," because all
Right.
depending, like if you give off fear vibes, they'll smell your fear and they're like, "No," it's like, but if you give off like, "Hey,"
Mm-hmm.
like like there is something to the energy you're giving off, and it's an unsaid thing that people can feel. And so I mean, so when it's in an intimate verite situation, that's important. I've also filmed things where that's just not, like I followed Trump during the 2016 elections. It was not possible for me to give over an
Right.
energy. I like you in
Right.
any possible way. It was traumatizing, in fact. But I was open and
Mm-hmm.
present and receptive to what was unfolding before me. But it was challenging.
Right.
It was it's challenging to also film things that are awful. I did a story on rape as a weapon of war in the Congo, where I filmed with survivors, but also perpetrators.
Right.
Having to film perpetrators,
Right.
it's like in that case, it's bravery, it's confidence, it's courage when
Mm-hmm.
you have to face dark things in humanity.
Right.
Because not everything you film is is a good person.
Right. Yeah,
You know,
exactly. So from a standpoint of once you're done filming the story, and like in this particular instance with Girl State, are you brought in on the post side of things, or like once you're done with, I guess, your side of the story and everything, then you kind of move on to the next project?
it really depends on the project. In the case of Girls State, I was not involved.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there have been other films where I have a long-term connection with the director, or the only DP or something,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll send me various cuts, and I'll give notes of like, "Oh, remember when you said this," or or this shot, I think there's a shot that's better than this one, if you
Right.
wouldn't be swapping it out, or and I honestly, I think it's such a mistake for directors not to make DPs part of the edit,
Right.
especially in documentaries,
Mm-hmm.
because like we are living it, especially if they're not present. We are living it through the lens. I remember things I shot years ago. Like I remember it's crazy. It's
Right.
like get embedded in your brain. And while I'm filming it, I have the edit in mind. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's hardly ever a project where I feel like a shot hasn't been overlooked, or they didn't, quite edit it the way that I thought it could have been, in the way I shot it, or like they didn't quite see. Um, I mean, sometimes you're surprised and they find things, but I feel like a lot of times things are overlooked, and it should be standard practice to like, show one of the final cuts to your DP. Just get some, take it or
Right.
leave the notes. But like, I feel like a DP's notes on a doc edit should be standard and important. And you don't have to take it, but at least offer it.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And not only the edit and shooting for the edit and those notes, but also too just the recipe of the look, whether it's, certain filtration or color, like I mean, there's a reason why, DPs, there's time before and, the pre-production where you're prepping and discussing if you're shooting with a C500, C7, C7, like whatever, and, what lenses with filtration. And so, yeah, that's super important to include, the DP's notes and the post side of things.
Oh, for sure. I mean, ideally I'm doing the color correction. Um, that doesn't always happen, but when I can, I try and get it in the contract. But more than any filter or lenses or anything, it's like we are present for the moments and we are building the scene.
Right.
So like, and there's like there's so much footage to look over. Like there's in a documentary, you capture hundreds of hours. There's so many films that can be made, and it's so easy to look over and miss great shots.
Mm-hmm.
So, and more likely than not, your DP is gonna remember, oh, if you just went to another take of that, I really nailed it. Or,
Mm-hmm.
this landscape shot would be so much more powerful for this moment you're trying to create. Because
Right.
it's not, we're there in service of the story. We're all there for the same goal to create the best film possible. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's, you know.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And as we're coming on time, I want to ask you because it's like I wanted to ask you kind of before we got into the project, but I usually wait until the end, and I
Oh.
didn't want to seem like I glossed over the fact that being a woman in the industry and succeeding and just being like, there's still so much that needs to happen, in the
Oh yeah.
industry for
Oh yeah.
representation and all. So I get it 100%. But
Uh-huh.
the question that I have is for newcomers.
Hmm.
So maybe there's a young woman that's just finishing film school that is an AC
Hmm.
or wants to be a cinematographer, and they're looking at your work or other cinematographers that are women and wondering, okay, how do I navigate this industry? And like, can you kind of inspire them and give them maybe a tip or something to just speak to them directly?
Well, first of all, the landscape that you're in now is so different from when I came up. So embrace it. Now is the time where diversity is welcomed. It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean you always get it. But it's a different landscape. But at the end of the day, I feel like success is where talent meets tenacity.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many times I have wanted to give up. So many times I was like, fuck this. This
Right.
no one's gonna give me a shot, or this, or I've had too many Me Too moments, or like there's so many times I've wanted to give up, and it's just not giving up. You
Mm-hmm.
just and if you fall down, if you fail, you get up and you do it again, and you just keep getting up. And it's tenacity is that generates success in the end, more than anything. And at some point someone's going to give you a break for the next level, but then there's always a next level. It's like
Right.
now people are like, oh, you're successful, and I'm like, I've barely reached where I feel like I have the potential to reach, or where I want to reach, so
Mm-hmm.
but I can also see at the same time, the me from 10 years ago would be proud, but I'm also like, wait, where's my, um, so I guess also just appreciate where you are, and how far you've come.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, and the other thing is
Mm-hmm.
believe in yourself. I feel like there's especially coming up in the 2000s where I'd go on set and people would like direct me to hair and makeup because they didn't think I was in the camera. It was like, people didn't believe. When you're surrounded by people that somehow don't necessarily believe in you, so you can start to believe it yourself.
Right.
bullshit, and I had to get over that. You have to believe in yourself, not in some sort of egotistical kind of way, but in a confident, like, I've worked hard, I'm doing the work, I have good intention, I believe that I am capable. And when you believe that you're capable and you have that confidence, then others around you are more likely to follow suit and support you. Um, but it's really finding the strength in yourself to believe in yourself and to not give up.
Right. For sure. I mean, I like have nothing to add to that because it was so well said. Yeah, like that was fantastic advice and inspiration for sure. So for the listeners out there that want to follow what you're doing, follow you, what's
Mm.
the best place to keep up with what you're doing?
Well, I guess you could follow me on Instagram. It's Laura, Laura dot Hudock, Hudock, is my handle. I mostly post stories.
Mm-hmm.
So you can sort of see where I am in the world or what I'm working on. And then also my website, laurahudock.com.
Okay, awesome. Well, Laura, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk about your journey. I really love the documentary narrative kind of, talk that we had because I mean that's just like cinematography gold as far as like people learning
Mhm.
like navigating through both spaces and everything. So I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
So again, I want to thank Laura for coming on the Capture Light podcast. Be sure to follow her, keep up with what she's doing. Go to her Instagram, give her a follow. Yeah, she's putting out amazing work in both the documentary space and the narrative space. So if you have any questions for me, you can always hit me up. You can send me an email, les@gaddisvisuals.com. You can follow me at Les Gaddis on Instagram or reach out to me if you have any questions there. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was a really, really good one. And I will catch you in the next episode of Capturing Light.
Thanks for listening to Capturing Light with Les Gaddis, a Director of Photographers podcast. Inspiring and educating filmmakers like you so you can illuminate your vision. A Gaddis Visuals production.